What's going on, everybody? Kalipus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the TCL 30XL and the Samsung Galaxy A03s. Now, before we go any further, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the TCL 30XL, we're getting a 6.82-inch LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 270, an aspect ratio of 20.5:9, and a 90% screen-to-body ratio. With the Samsung Galaxy A03s, we're getting a 6.5-inch PLS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a 270 PPI, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and an 81.8% screen-to-body ratio. So these displays are pretty similar, and for what they are, you really won't go wrong with either of them. But that being said, the TCL 30XL does have a couple advantages. First of all, as you can clearly see here, the TCL 30XL is much larger, and this tends to be a good thing when you're consuming a lot of content. In addition to this, with a 20.5:9 aspect ratio versus 20:9, the TCL 30XL is getting a slightly taller and more narrow form factor, so when you're doing something like watching a video in landscape mode, for example, you're going to get a more immersive experience, and if you're doing something like reading an article or using social media, you'll be able to fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. So in general, again, for what they are, you really won't go wrong with either phone. But if you're really consuming a lot of content and you want the best between the two, because of the size and dimensions, the TCL 30XL will have a bit of an advantage. Now for storage, with the TCL 30XL, we're getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and the Samsung Galaxy A03s is getting 32GB with microSD card expansion as well. So clearly here, the TCL 30XL does have an advantage with double the storage of the Samsung Galaxy A03s, and really, in my opinion, having only 32GB of internal storage is really not even acceptable. In this day and age, stuff like apps and even the system itself is taking up more and more space, and no matter what you're doing on your phone, 32GB is going to fill up pretty quickly. And on the other hand, while even 64GB isn't really ideal, it's still at least acceptable. So in general, if you're planning on having a decent amount of apps, the TCL 30XL is definitely going to have a huge advantage here. But that being said, if you're really a light user and you're only getting a phone for the basics, like sending text messages, making calls, and maybe some really light web browsing and social media and stuff like that, you'll at least get by with the Samsung Galaxy A03s in that situation. And again, remember, both of these phones also do have microSD card expansion, so if you have a bunch of photos and videos, for example, you can always offload that stuff onto a microSD card, and that's definitely going to help. But again, if you do have a good amount of apps you like to use, the TCL 30XL having double the storage is definitely going to have an advantage. Now for security features, both of these phones do have face unlock, and they both have fingerprint scanners as well. With the TCL 30XL, it's right here on the back, and with the Samsung Galaxy A03s, it's right here on the power key. But that being said, starting with the TCL 30XL, let's give these fingerprint scanners a try and see how well they work. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And moving on to the Samsung Galaxy A03s. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, both fingerprint scanners were real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, remember, both phones also have face unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, both phones have water drop notches for the front facing cameras. They pretty much look exactly the same. With the TCL 30XL, it's 13 megapixels, and with the Samsung Galaxy A03s, it's 5 megapixels. Now on the back, with the TCL 30XL, we got a quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. With the Samsung Galaxy A03s, we got a triple camera setup with a 13 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, as far as features go, neither phone is bad. But I would say the TCL 30XL does have an advantage here, since this phone does have an ultra-wide camera, and the Samsung Galaxy A03s unfortunately doesn't. So if you are taking a lot of photos and you want a wider variety of features, the TCL 30XL will have an advantage, and as far as photo quality goes, it's really the same thing. While neither phone is going to be anywhere near flagship level, the TCL 30XL is going to be significantly better than the Samsung Galaxy A03s. Now the A03s really isn't terrible per se, and it's actually pretty impressive for what it is. It's not like you won't be able to get social media photos and stuff like that with this phone, but at the same time, between the two, I would say the TCL 30XL does have significantly better photo quality. So again, if you're taking a lot of photos and that's really something that's important to you, then I would definitely recommend the TCL 30XL over the Samsung Galaxy A03s. But that being said, if your needs are more basic and you're really just taking a few photos every now and then, the Samsung Galaxy A03s will at least get the job done. For video, these phones both have a max quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, so really nothing out of the ordinary there. And keep in mind, as far as quality goes, both phones are going to have your typical entry-level level video quality. So if you're making a lot of videos you want to keep for something more important, like a vlog or YouTube for example, then I would definitely recommend looking into a higher end device that can record better videos. But if you're just making videos for something like Snapchat or the occasional social media video depending on your standards, either phone will get the job done. Now as far as RAM and processor go, with the TCL 30 XL, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio A25 processor. With the Samsung Galaxy A03s, we're getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio P35. Now I ran Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both of these phones, and as you can see, the results are pretty much exactly the same, with the TCL 30 XL coming back with a single core score of 156 and a multi-core score of 885, and the Samsung Galaxy A03s coming back with a single core score of 174 and a multi-core score of 888. So again, as far as performance goes, you're really not going to see much of a difference between the two compared to the really low-end phones you can get for like $30. Both of these phones are going to be noticeably faster than that, but at the same time, you're really not going to be able to do a lot of heavy activities on them, like mobile gaming and stuff like that. For the more basic games, like Angry Birds for example, you'll be able to at least play them, but you're probably not going to get the best experience. And if you're really just going to be on your phone a lot, I would recommend considering a slightly higher end device with a faster processor. But that being said, for more basic activities, if you're really just going to be doing things like browsing the web, using social media, and you're not going to be on your phone all the time, either phone will definitely get the job done. But again, between the two, you're really not going to see a noticeable difference. So in this case, I would definitely not make a decision based on processing power. Now for the batteries, the TCL 30 XL is getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 18W fast charging, and the Samsung Galaxy A03s is getting a 5000 mAh battery as well that supports 15W fast charging. So these phones have pretty much the same batteries. Sure, there's a slight 3W difference in fast charging, but that's really not going to make a huge difference for most people. Even if you have an 18W fast charger, the charging speeds with the Samsung Galaxy A03s are going to be perfectly fine, and with 5000 mAh batteries, that's pretty much the largest battery you can get in a smartphone, at least in the US. So if the battery is a priority for you, both phones are going to be great options. Another thing to keep in mind is that unfortunately, neither of these phones have NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, you won't be able to do that with either of them. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, I would say the TCL 30 XL is going to be a better choice between the two for two different reasons. First of all, the display is significantly larger, and again, this really tends to be a good thing when you're consuming a lot of content, and with a slightly taller and more narrow form factor, you're going to get a more immersive experience and a better scrolling experience as well. But that being said, as far as the aspect ratio goes, that's really not a huge difference, because with the Samsung Galaxy A03s, with an aspect ratio of 20:9, the form factor in this phone is great as well, and at 6.5 inches, sure it's obviously not as large as the TCL 30 XL, but it's still decently large, so if you're consuming a lot of content on this phone, then you're still not going to get a bad experience. Now, one other thing I do kind of want to point out here is that in this video, the A03s does look a little bit brighter than the TCL 30 XL, but in real life, the TCL 30 XL is actually just as bright. For whatever reason, the HDR on my iPhone is being kind of weird. But again, keep in mind, the A03s might look a little bit brighter in this video, but in person, when you're actually using these phones, the TCL 30 XL is just as bright. So in general, the image quality is going to be pretty much the same. But that being said, another advantage the TCL 30 XL has is the camera. Again, with this phone, we do get a full quad camera setup, which in this price range isn't really unheard of per se, but it's definitely a little bit less common. So if you do want an ultra wide camera and just a better quality camera overall, the TCL 30 XL will be a much better choice. But all that being said, while I would say the TCL 30 XL for the most part is a better device overall, the Samsung Galaxy A03s is still not a bad phone, and if you're looking for an entry-level device for really basic activities like sending text messages, making calls, light web browsing and social media use, and maybe watching the occasional video or two, this phone is really not going to be a bad choice, especially if you can get a good deal on it, because depending on the carrier you have, you might even be able to get this phone for free. But again, between the two, if you want a phone with a better display and a better camera, the TCL 30 XL is still going to be a better choice. But this concludes my comparison between the TCL 30 XL and the Samsung Galaxy A03s. Again, if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability, because this is always changing. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.